Hi everybody, and welcome to my second project for Chess24. For those who may have watched my first project, in that video series I covered the King's Indian defense, which was a very universal opening, providing you with a repertoire against several major moves that white can start with. d4, c4, and knight f3. Obviously, that doesn't cover a repertoire for the entire chess game, so in this series I'm going to dedicate my time to showing you my favorite opening after the first move, e4. My favorite opening against e4 at the moment is a variant of the Sicilian named the Taimanov. Taimanov starts with the moves c5, knight f3, e6, and usually white opts for the open Sicilian by pushing the pawn to d4 on move 3. c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, and after knight c3, the move queen c7. For a long time, this Sicilian never appealed too much to me, as it's a bit more slow and a bit more safe of a character compared to other Sicilians that you might be more familiar with, such as the Dragon or the Najdorf, which are very sharp. However, in 2013, something interesting happened, and this opening gained kind of a momentum, and since then has been a more regular guest at actually every level, but especially at the top level. I was inspired to start it myself in 2013 by looking at the games of Vladimir Potkin, who is a very strong Russian grandmaster and a former European chess champion. Once again, in the video series, I'm gonna be looking through all the lines that white can play, offering you recommendations against every specific line and trying to help you out and give you a feeling of how to play this opening and how to look at different structures that may occur in your games. We're going to start off in the first couple of videos by looking why the Sicilian Taimanov has gained sort of a momentum over the last few years and why people started to like it more. We'll be doing that by looking into the English attack, which is one of the most universal systems to handle the Sicilian defense for white. I hope you're going to enjoy the series and have fun. Thanks for watching. This is Robin for Chess24. Hi everybody, and welcome to the first video covering the content of the Sicilian Taimanov. As I said before, in the first couple of videos we're going to be looking at the English attack, which is, historically speaking, the most dangerous system against the Taimanov Sicilian. Before looking at the critical position, which is the following position, I'll shortly go through the moves with you. After queen c7, obviously white has several moves at his disposal that we'll all go through during this series. Some of them are g3, bishop e2, and f4. But once again, bishop e3 is what is considered to be the absolutely critical approach. And after a6, queen d2, knight f6, long castle, we have what is actually a very typical site in the Sicilian defense, in several Sicilian defenses, where white places his pieces very harmonically and castles queenside very early in order to start an attack on the king side with f3, g4, and h4. Well, before bishop e7, which is the move that I'm going to show you, came into fashion, it was thought that bishop b4 was the only serious move in this position. And after f3, knight e5, white has several tries at his disposal. One of them is queen e1, one of them is king b1. And it turns out that white is a little bit better in these lines. Although they are still seen from time to time, black is generally not too happy going into this theory. But then in 2013, as I mentioned before, Vladimir Potkin came up with a new setup for black, which starts with bishop e7. He introduced this idea, to my knowledge, in a game against Dominguez, which happened in Havana. After bishop e7, f3, b5, g4, he played the move bishop b7. And after g5, he followed up with knight takes d4. A very sharp move, which was obviously partly analyzed with the computer, as after g takes f6, knight takes f3. There are huge complications arising. Queen f2, bishop takes f6, queen takes f3, black is a piece down for 2 pawns. and here he can take on c3. And it turns out that black might have enough compensation in this variation. However, later on we realized, or the black players realized, that it's not necessary to allow this. And black can start off taking on d4 first. And after bishop takes d4, which is the move that I'm actually covering in this video, queen takes d4 is actually the move that I have more experience with myself, as I've played one game on the white side, which was, well, we'll get to that in the next video, but quite a tragedy. I mean, it didn't turn out very well for me. And I also played it as black. I faced it twice and managed to win both of those games. However, bishop takes d4 is the move we're looking at first. And after bishop b7, we would transpose into that first game, Dominguez-Potkin, after g5, knight h5. In fact, g5 is probably the most critical move, but before going into the lines, I just want to briefly talk about this position, as it looks like a very typical Sicilian English attack position, but there are a few slight differences that work in black's favor. First of all, compared to, let's say, a classical Sicilian where black develops his knights to c6 and f6 without putting the queen to c7, there's a big difference of having a pawn on d7, as the pawn is on d6 in those systems usually. The benefit of having the pawn on d7 is quite simple. In these Sicilian positions, it really comes down to tempos, or tempi, normally speaking. And the interesting thing is that in many of the lines, black sometimes has the option of playing e5 followed by d5 in one go, or maybe d5 immediately, allowing e5 and going into some sort of French defense after e5 and knight d7. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the bishop is on b7 rather than d7, and it turns out that for these types of position, the bishop is a lot better on b7. One reason I can give you is something I've experienced myself, a trick that I knew about, but I fell into anyway, which happened after queen takes d4. Just to illustrate, after queen takes d4, I believe my game went bishop b7, and after something like h4, or I think it was king b1, rook c8, I played the move queen d2, which looks fairly logical, stopping the idea of bishop c5, changing those bishops, and maybe also exchanging the queens, which is generally something you want to do in the Sicilian defense as black. It turned out that I made a big mistake. I didn't consider the strength of the bishop on b7, and after the moves b4 and knight a4, I was hit with a very serious tactic. Maybe you can see it. The move knight takes e4 actually happened. And after f takes e4, bishop takes e4, I was in a lot of trouble, as both my rook and my c2 pawn are hanging. And it turns out that after bishop d3, bishop takes h1, rook takes h1, queen c6, even though I'm temporarily up 2 pieces for a rook and 2 pawns, which is decent, it turns out that I'm losing another piece, as both my knight and my rook were hanging. I managed to win this game anyway. I'm not sure how that happened. I think I played a better move than bishop d3. I think I played bishop takes a6. But just to illustrate how tricky it is to have a slightly different version of the Sicilian that you're used to, and how quickly white can get into trouble. This actually happened to me after analyzing this line for quite a long time, and my memory didn't serve me very well, and I got into a lost position in no time. So a lot of potential there to trick your opponents. So let's go into the lines. After bishop takes d4, bishop b7, I think the most critical move is g5, and I'll show you why g5 is such a critical move. The first thing you might think is, well, g5 looks logical, but the knight on h5 is actually quite a well-placed piece, as it eventually stops white from advancing further on the king side. Once black castles, that's something he generally wants to do in order to start up an attack. And that's absolutely right. One of the ideas white does have here is the idea of knight e2 followed by knight g3, trying to force black to take that knight and open up the h-file by playing h6, g3. But the real reason why g5 is such a critical test for this setup for black is the funny looking move bishop e5, which is actually just a tactical trick. And this is also the first move that I started to look into when I was analyzing this for black and white, because I like to play these positions as white as well. And it turns out that after the following sequence, queen takes e5, queen takes d7 check, king f8, queen takes b7, queen b8. Actually, bishop takes g5 is also an option here, but I'll explain to you later why I don't like that move as much. Queen b8, rook d7. Other moves, I would refer you to my ebook, but the ebook that will be published together with the series in which you can find all the lines, but I can shortly go through that, show you them, like queen takes b8, rook takes b8, h4. I'm not too worried about these positions. Yes, white is a pawn up, but at the same time, after h6, I think black enjoys full compensation, as these pawns are way weaker than black's queenside minority. So for example, g takes h6, rook takes h6, knight e2, b4, followed by a5, and besides having opposite color bishops, which already increases black's chances to draw, I don't even think black's really playing for a draw here, because white will always be stuck with his pawn on h4. So if he wants to try to somehow create a majority on the queen side, he will end up giving that pawn away, and the position will become double-edged. I go a little bit deeper into this analysis, but just to give you an idea of what you can find in the ebook. Another move for white would be the move queen c6, keeping the queens on the board, which makes some sense as black's king is kind of stuck in the center for now, but that problem is easily solved with the move g6. And after something like h4, now protecting the pawn on g5 once again, king g7, knight e2, rook c8, it turns out that white has really spent way too much time taking that pawn, and his queen is being chased around the board, which gives black excellent compensation after, for example, queen d7, rook a7, queen d4 check, king g8, followed by, let's say, something like rook c7 or rook d8, or maybe even bishop c5. There's many options here for black, and the real reason that this is so pleasant is because, as you can see, the initiative is shifting towards black. White's king will fall under an attack, whereas we still have this blockading knight, and white is nowhere close to creating any threats to the black king. So really, there's only one move that's to be taken serious after this tactical trick, which is the move rook d7, going into an ending, but at the same time getting his rook on the 7th rank. And here you'll find the reason why I don't want to take the pawn on g5 as black. After queen takes b7, rook takes b7, I still have the option of playing bishop takes g5 check. However, after the sequence bishop takes g5, king b1, bishop f6, a logical move trying to improve the bishop and maybe take the knight, causing white a double pawn. I think white is a little bit better after a4, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, b takes a4, and here the strong move, bishop takes a6. And even though this was played in games, I believe, and black managed to draw, I've always thought that, at least over the past few years when I came back to this position and looked at it, I've always felt that this is a little bit unpleasant over the board. So I wouldn't advise you to go for this. And in fact, I want to introduce a novelty in this position. At least I didn't find any games with it at this point, which is the move h6. Once again, I'm playing for activity rather than just taking the pawn back. I want to involve my h8 rook as soon as possible. So after h4, knight g3, it's clear that white hasn't achieved anything. I will take on f1 and then pick up the g5 pawn. And g takes h6, rook takes h6 is also not something as I would advise, as knight g3 is again a very annoying threat. And after something like rook g1, knight f4, this pawn is very hard to defend. So the critical test here is g6. And after f takes g6, it may look like black's structure is ruined, but in fact, I did speed up the process of getting my pieces on the king side out active, as I now have a square on f7 for my king, and my rook can come into play very smoothly. So after something like a4, king f7, and let's say bishop d3 takes on a4, knight takes a4 and a5, followed by getting the rook into play, I think black is doing pretty well and the position is around equal. And actually black still has chances to win the game, as maybe later on he can put the knight to f4 and get his king into an active position if the rooks are traded. So that's it for the most forcing continuation white can actually choose from. There are many options that I analyzed here for white, but what I really want to get into is the most critical lines and have you checked the other lines in the ebook. So another one that I would like to mention is the move h4. Slower moves such as queen f2 are also possible, but really the general tendency is that eventually black will go short castle, for example here. And after something like, let's say, a3, black can always go bishop c6 followed by a5 and b4, or maybe rook fb8 and then a5 b4, getting excellent counterplay. And if white decides to make more slow moves such as bishop d3, black can already take over the initiative by starting b4, knight e2, or knight a4, but let's say knight e2, d6, and start attacking with these pawns. And the point being that in a normal English attack, white wouldn't play slowly with moves like queen f2 and bishop d3. So really what is the critical test here, in my opinion, is the move h4, castles, and h5. This actually introduces a very serious threat of playing g5, which would kick our knight back to e8, and then playing g6, which would just automatically give white an enormous attack and black a very bad position. So it's all about this position, in my opinion, which seems to be okay for black after the moves e5, bishop to e3, and then d5. Once again, basically here we can see why it was so important to leave that pawn on d7, as we've now gained the full tempo by playing it to d5 in one move. After g5, d4, white could consider taking on d5, but that would just give the knight a square on d5, so after rook fd8, let's say g5, knight takes d5, black is just having a very good position as white is facing all sorts of difficulties on this d file and in the center. So g5 is what white should probably opt for. But I concluded that after the moves d4, gf6, bishop takes f6, knight d5, bishop takes d5, e takes d5, d takes e3, queen takes e3, queen d6, black might seem to be in a little bit of trouble, but objectively with these opposite color bishops it's going to be very hard for white to attack him. So after, for example, bishop d3, rook fd8, followed by king b1, g6, I think as black you will have no difficulty playing this position. Even if a queen would eventually come to something like h7 by being transferred to the h file, black still has a safe spot for the king on f8. Whereas black can think about moves like rook c8, rook c5, putting pressure on this d-pawn. And if white decides to passively defend that with bishop e4, he can start about pushing his own pawns and creating threats against the white king. So really this is a very double-edged position, and I think that this is one of the main reasons why this system works so well right now for black. White is simply not able to get an advantage with logical moves, and like I said, if he does decide to play slow moves such as queen f2 or maybe rook g1 or moves that don't really play according to the style of the English attack, I think black is doing well by eventually transposing back into normal territory by putting the pawn to d6 and pushing his pawns to b4 and a5. One last line I would like to show you is the move bishop d3. As in this particular move order, Black's play is a little bit different. I like the move e5 here. And after bishop e3, I like the move bishop b4. The reason for this is that bishop d3 is not the most handy move here for white to have, as it completely blocks his play on the d file. Black is actually doing pretty well in an endgame after exchanging on c3. So for example, after the move g5, knight h5, a3, I looked a little bit into this ending, and I think black is doing quite well. For example, king b2, d6, followed by king e7, and maybe eventually h6 again. So that's one last line where black's play is a little bit different. For all the other lines, I think I compiled a good analysis that you can look up, and I think you'll have no difficulty understanding the lines after my brief explanation in this video. So next time we're going to be looking at queen takes d4, which has a few subtleties which are a little different than bishop takes d4, although the general tendency of that line is similar. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you managed to understand a little bit what is going on in this English attack position and why black is actually doing quite well. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.
2014 was a great year for chess. Chess24 brought you live interactive broadcasts from top tournaments. A play zone where you can take on opponents from all around the world 24/7. Interactive beginners courses, ensuring you pick up the basics fast while having fun. A tactics trainer to sharpen your chess by solving puzzles adapted to your level. Hundreds of interactive videos. Chess24 on mobiles and tablets. Most features are free, but limited for registered members. Chess24 is offering a special premium membership for just $99 per year. See you at chess24.com.